Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Quisha King Show, where we discuss faith, culture, and politics, all geared towards the next generation. Today, I have for you a very, very special guest. I didn't even know that he was so into all of these things, but you're going to be very, very surprised and pleased at how knowledgeable this man is. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Alex Newman.
Hey, Keisha, great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for being here. So, you are involved in quite a bit of things. Why don't you tell the audience all the things that you do?
Well, I do quite a few things, mostly journalism. I write for a number of different publications in the United States and overseas. Right now, I'm the senior editor at the New American magazine. I'm a regular contributor to the Epoch Times. I write for WND and the Law Enforcement Intelligence Brief. I do a weekly education blog over at Freedom Project Media, and that's a few of them. Also, I serve as the executive director of Public School Exit, which is an organization dedicated to trying to rescue as many children as possible from the government schools. I'm running for office in Florida's 28th district, and that's kind of it in a nutshell. I guess there's more
And
things.
you're a
But
dad.
covers them. That's
And a
right. I
husband.
got 5 children and a wonderful wife. So
Yeah. Wow. My goodness. Well, thank you for being in the fight. I remember when I was putting up Massexodusmovement.com, and Public School Exit was one of the first websites that I came across. I had no idea that you were associated with them. And so, like, as I'm digging around, I see on the Public School Exit website, New American magazine. And I remember when we met that back in 2020 at the coffee shop, you gave me the magazine. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, let me see if I still have his number. And I did. And then here we are today. And so it is just, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for all of the work that you've been putting in over the years. So many of us, our heads were in the sand. We had no idea what was going on, but you have been screaming this message of getting your children out of government schools, screaming this message of what is going on in the schools. And when people just, not enough people were paying attention. And certainly now people are paying attention, but it is because of the work that you and people like you have done over the years that kind of makes this, us slackers and us stragglers who are coming in late to the party, that has made it a little bit easier because you guys have done amazing work. So thank you so much.
well, thank you, Keisha. I know you've been doing incredible work. I think we first met when you were working on the Trump campaign in Florida, and I mean, you did such a wonderful job. We met most recently at the Villagers for Trump, the DeSantis Day dinner, and I know you've been on the front lines of this battle for a long time. And honestly, with the public schools, that's a realization that everybody has to come to. We've all been brought up in this culture and this system where it's just taken for granted that the government's going to educate the majority of children. And you really have to stop and think about it. You have to look at the history. You have to see the things that are going on there before finally all the pieces connect and you say, whoa, wait a minute, something's really wrong here. So, I was just incredibly honored to be able to work with people like Dr. Sam Blumenfeld, who'd been focusing on this for 60 years of his life. And just, trying to carry the torch forward. And I think now it is finally becoming more obvious to people. And I'm encouraged by that. We have a situation where in the last couple of years, all over the country, parents have been recoiling in horror at what they're seeing in their children's school books, at what they're seeing on the Zoom classes. And so this is a realization that I think is now finally starting to dawn on America, but definitely better late than never.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So tell us, what was your introduction to the public school system and government schools and how dangerous they were? So even though like I was one of those moms that I heard something over the, over Zoom, my daughter was asked what pronoun she wanted to go by. Like this was asked to the whole class. First week of 8th grade. And I was like, what the heck? Like, why is she asking you that? So this was not something they try to say, oh, the children are telling us that this is what they want. No, it wasn't like that. The teacher was pushing this on them. They were not asking for this. She was the one that was doing it. So that's that. But so even through that process, I did not discover the Prussian school model, America's public school set up where we got it from, that still came much later. When did you discover, this, where we got our model from? How did you come into that information?
Well, it was a slow process, Keisha. In fact, I've got a unique background, a different background. I actually never stepped foot in a government school in America. We left the country when I was 4. I grew up
Mm,
mostly in Latin America, then in Europe, then in Africa, then back to Europe. So I never went to a government school in America or anywhere else. But when I did come back, and my younger brother did actually enroll in a public school for a short time, it became very obvious to me that something was very wrong. Now, I didn't
mm,
put all the pieces together, but I could tell something was really, really wrong with this. You had all these young kids, 16, 17, that were addicted to heroin and smoking crack. You're like, what in the world is going on
at
here?
school?
Yeah, at school. Yep. It was just
Whoa, I
incredible.
did
Some of
not
the
know
people
that.
that we were meeting. Yeah. And so, what really started my journey on this was in about 2010, 2011. I read a little blurb in a newspaper about a new set of national standards that was being developed by the federal government of what would eventually become known as Common Core. I thought, that's really weird.
Mm,
I'm certainly not an expert on the Constitution. I didn't know a lot back then, but I understood that national standards, that's weird. So as I started digging
mm,
into them, I ended up doing a cover story for the New American Magazine on Common Core. I think that appeared in 2012, and really started connecting the dots and realizing, whoa, all these terrible things that we're fighting, all these battles that we're waging, they all go back to education. And so a couple of years after that, I had been writing a lot about what was happening at that time. A couple of years
mm,
after that, Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld and WND Books contacted me and said, hey, Sam is, and I knew of Sam's work. He and I had written for a lot of the same publications, including WND, which at the time was the biggest conservative Christian media outlet in the world. They said, hey, would you be interested in working with Sam on this new book that we're going to be doing about education? And
mhm,
we've seen that you've written on Common Core and what's going on in the schools now. I said, absolutely, I would. So I had that opportunity to do that. I ended up reading every book that Sam had ever written, and a lot of it was on the history of the public education system. Like, he did a book called "Is Public Education Necessary?" and that led me down, even deeper research. And so that's how it got started. And the more I
mm.
thought about it, the more I realized this is the battle that will determine the outcome of all of the other battles. Because if they brainwash, whatever percentage of kids they have in the government schools right now, I think it's 70, in the low 70s% at least, we're
Mhm.
going to lose all the other battles. And so that's why I've made it such a top priority in my work.
Oh my gosh, I 1000% agree. So how I kind of came into this, I was like, okay, how did something like critical race theory even get into America? It's so antithetical to the American idea, the American experiment, just everything that we believe in. This hierarchy of, if you're white, blah, blah, all these things, and you're oppressor. Then if you're, minority, you're oppressed. And I mean, it was just weird. So that's kind of how I started going down the rabbit hole of where did this come from. And so during in the study of critical race theory, like I said, it took me a while to get to the Prussian school model, but looking at Prussia and how that's set up, I'm like, oh my gosh, you can map critical race theory right on top of the Prussian school model. And then American, I guess the experts, they go over and they pick up this model and bring it and import it back to America. And I totally agree. The school, the government school, is where they indoctrinate everyone. So you wonder why the universities are filled with crazy people. Well, they were probably educated in government schools. You wonder why the politicians are less than smart. They were educated in government schools. You see our meat, our entertainment, every pillar, every institution, most of those people were educated in government schools. So it's a no-brainer that this issue is the linchpin that holds this whole all of these crazy, stupid, quite frankly, just stupid ideas, non-thinkers, people who will not, you can show them literal evidence of something and they are incapable of understanding how these things are bad. You can literally show people evidence of something and they're just like, well, I just don't see it. And it's like, how? government schools. I mean, you can't convince me otherwise. I'm sorry, like you just cannot convince me. And even you shared with me that movie Mind Polluters. It's funny because I was just on another call and somebody actually brought up the film, and I was like, "This is so crazy." You're not. I'm just like, it's anyway. It was really funny that they brought that up. But even through Mind Polluters, when you listen to these sick people and what they're doing, what they have done and are currently doing to our children through this comprehensive sex education, I don't even know how you were able to stomach shooting the film and like getting through it, because it is disturbing. What was your experience like with helping create the movie? Or I don't even know like all of your connection to it, but you certainly shared it with me. So what can you just tell us more about the movie?
Sure. In my opinion, it is the best movie out there focusing on the sexualization of children. And I
Yeah.
think people need to understand too, the sexualization of the children is much more than just perversion. It's much more than just trying to get your children to reject sexual morality, which in and of
Mhm.
itself is incredibly problematic. But it goes way beyond that. The ulterior motive behind the sickness is really an effort to tear down the nuclear family.
Mhm.
It's an effort to tear down marriage. It's an effort to, and through the tearing down of family and through the tearing down of marriages, to transfer control over the raising of the next generation to the state. Now, Karl Marx and all the communists before and after him, incidentally, one of the founding fathers of the Prussian system was a guy called Robert Owen, a communist in the early 1800s, even before Karl Marx came on the scene. And they all recognized, they all desired very passionately to supplant every other source of authority and power and influence with the state. Karl
Yeah.
Marx made that crystal clear in the Communist Manifesto and all of his
Mhm.
writings. We've got to supplant the family with the state. We've got to supplant the church with the state. And so everything must revolve around the state. And that
Mhm.
is really the objective, I think, of the sexualization. Yes, there's the grooming. Yes, they want the kids, fornicating and doing abortions and things like that. But
Mhm.
ultimately, they want to just break down the nuclear family, which has always formed the foundation of a society,
Yeah.
and transfer all of those responsibilities, the upbringing of the children, the passing down of culture from one generation to the next, the passing down of religious values and civilization from one generation to the next. They want to transfer all those functions over to the state, to the government schools. They really think they have then just a clean slate to write on. If they can rip these kids from their parents at the earliest possible age. And to
Yeah.
go back to something you mentioned too about, why can't people look at evidence and see what's happening in front of them? It's because of the methodologies and the pedagogy that's happening in government schools. This is not education in the sense that people think of education. This is really behavioral conditioning. This is the way they train circus
Mm,
animals. It's
that's
very much
good.
along the lines of what Pavlov did, right? He rang the bell and the dogs would start salivating. That's what they're
Yes.
doing. They're giving children a conditioned response to a particular stimulus so that
Ugh.
when they hear certain trigger words, instead of saying, hey, that's interesting, I'd like to explore further, let me see the evidence, they start salivating or the equivalent, and they start throwing out dumb terms like racism or cisgender privilege, or pick
Mhm.
whatever conditioned
White
term is in their
supremacy.
mind. Precisely, yep.
Yeah.
And so they just have these conditioned responses, and what you see is they're totally immune to logic, they're totally immune to evidence. They've just got these conditioned responses, and that is
Oh my
absolutely
God.
by design. We've got to get over it.
Oh man, that is so crazy. That is, you are so right. Because I know just in my little bit of study with this Prussian model, even down you mentioned a bell ringing, that was part of the conditioning. A school bell ringing, it was to make sure your little factory workers were prepared to acknowledge the bell and know that they needed to go on to their next station, just preparing everybody to work at the factory. I think it was Carnegie. He was like, oh, we don't need any more innovators, scientists, philosophers, writers, we're good, we got that part. We'll just have everybody else work for us. And I mean, literally, that was why, it was certainly a huge part of why they were doing this, so they could have this elite class and then everybody else. And I mean, just to literally create slaves, just slaves to the state. And so, man, I never even thought about that. I'm like taking notes because now I want to go down another rabbit hole of this whole behavior conditioning. Can What are some of the other things that people do in this model that conditions behavior. Just, can you tell us some more?
Yeah, well, B.F. Skinner, behavioral psychologist, was one of the pioneers in the field. He actually came up with something known as the Skinner box, and there were reports that he had put his baby in there, and so people were kind of outraged, and it kind of fell out of fashion. But it was originally a method of conditioning animals to display the traits or the characteristics or the behaviors that were desired by the trainer. And so they would put mice in one of these Skinner boxes, and if they did the right thing, they'd get rewarded with food. If they did the wrong thing, they'd get electrocuted. And what would happen very quickly is the mouse or the rat would understand, okay, I better not do that, and I better do this. And so that is actually the strategy that's being used today in schools. It's just slightly more sophisticated. So instead of an electric shock or a little dose of food or a little dose of serotonin, what happens is they're stuck on these devices, and the device will present some sort of question, very often on politically sensitive topics like abortion or open borders or critical race theory or whatever, gender stuff, gender fluidity. And so they'll ask the child a question. They'll present some certain stimulus, and then the child is expected to display a response. And if they display the right response, you get little happy music, little smiley faces pop up on the screen, and it's just exactly the same. A little boost of serotonin, just exactly the same as in the Skinner box, just slightly more complex and more computerized. Or if they display the wrong reaction, wrong according to the people running the system, then they get sad faces. They go and you get it. So and so the children then get conditioned. Okay, this is the response I'm supposed to have. This is the behavior or the opinion that I'm expected to exhibit when this situation confronts me. So that's the kind of tools. And honestly, this goes way back. If you look at, for example, John Dewey, a lot of his, I'll call them co-conspirators in imposing this monstrosity on our country, were coming out of the then nascent world of behavioral psychology. People like Wilhelm Wundt at Leipzig University, one of the pioneers in this field, ended up training a bunch of the leading American behavioral psychologists at his university in Germany. Then they came back here. They took up posts at Columbia University and other elite universities here in America, trained up the next generation of educators, and then unleashed this on our country. And we see the fruit. The Bible says, judge things by their fruit. Well, we see the fruit of what this has done to our country. It's literally collapsing all around us as a direct result of this kind of miseducation.
Oh my gosh, it's true. A lot of people are kind of under the mindset, and I don't know if it's just, so for me, when I first, started going down to school board meetings, in my mind, I literally was like, oh, okay, well, I just need to go down there, and make my voice known because they work for me. I'm a parent, I'm concerned. And then they're gonna, enough of us are gonna go down there and they're gonna do what we have demanded. Well, I was shocked. They had no interest in listening to me or any other parent. And it took me a couple months, but eventually I was like, oh, they don't care. And then we were called domestic terrorists. And I was like, okay, we need a mass exodus from the public school system. Like, when my government tells a concerned parent that calls us a domestic terrorist, all right, I'm out, I'm done. And so I pulled both of my daughters out of government schools. Well, I pulled my oldest out in December. My youngest I actually pulled out about 5 or 6 years ago, but for different reasons. Put her in a private school and decided I could do better than that too. But it's hard for people to get to that level of like, okay, there's no saving this system. And the little bit that you can do to hold it back, like your child may have graduated by the time you change a school board member, and so the damage is done. What do you think it's going to take for more families to realize this system was it's not broken, it's actually functioning exactly the way it was created to function? What do you think it's going to take for people to realize this?
Well, I think a lot of people are finally starting to realize this. In fact, even people that I've very publicly butted heads with on this issue. I'll give you a very clear and specific example. One of the co-founders of Moms for Liberty, wonderful lady. I can't say enough good things about her, but Tiffany Justice, The last time we were together in person was at an event that I spoke at, put on by Dr. Carol Swain in Tennessee, the Be the People conference. Ben Carson was there. So I gave up and I gave my talk and I said, folks, you got to get your kids out of public schools. They're being hurt there. And Tiffany came up to me, very nicely, but she said, I've got my kids in public school and I'm confident that I can oversee what they're learning and that I can protect them enough. Well, just about 2 weeks ago, she goes on Twitter and says, all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm pulling my kids out. I can't take it anymore. I guess her son came home with bruises or something that she put some pictures up. So, yeah, I mean, it's horrific. But what's happening now is even the people who were determined, the people who just were absolutely on fire for trying to reform the schools and stop the madness at the school board level. And she was a school board member, right? I mean, this is a woman who speaks
I used
from
to work with Moms for Liberty. I was a volunteer with Moms for Liberty. Yeah.
Yep. And so this is what's happening now to all kinds of reformers. They're gradually realizing the futility. We've got several people on our board at Public School Exit. We have the former superintendent of public instruction for the state of Arizona. She spent 30 years of her life, almost her entire career, trying to reform the system, all the way up to reaching the top education position in the entire state of Arizona. And after 4 years, she said, look, this is totally hopeless. We just need to get the children out. We've got Steve Baldwin on our board. He was the last conservative chairman of the Education Committee in the California Assembly. They passed a whole bunch of laws trying to reform the public school system. Of course, they weren't implemented. The schools kept doing what they were doing. So then he moved to the school boards. They got, I think he said, 50-something conservative members of school boards elected. They even flipped some school boards, and then they tried to make reforms, and then litigation and the unions and the state and the feds, and finally he said, this is totally hopeless. So what's going to be happening more and more in the months ahead is that these parents that are right now going out to school boards and hollering about, you need to stop doing that to my kids. They're being put under investigation. They're having FBI agents show up at their house. They're getting counterterrorism resources being used against them. They are going to realize this is hopeless. We've got to protect our kids. And they're going to tell their friends and their family. So there is a mass awakening happening right now. I don't think it can be stopped. I actually just got an email a couple of days ago from the Washington Compost asking me for a comment because, hey, you're trying to get people out of the public schools and blah, blah, blah. So they tried to ignore us for a long time. And now they're in attack mode. And frankly, attack mode is good for us too, because very few people are going to look at that and say, no, the public schools are great. How dare they say that, right? People know the fake media is lying. So this is a historic awakening, Quisha. I don't think it can be stopped. It's tremendously exciting, and it's only going to get bigger.
I totally agree. I know you have to run. Oh my gosh, this has been, I wish we have to do this again. We have to do this again where we can have a bit more of an extended conversation, because I've heard you speak. I've read I've read things that you've written. I know there's so much more that people need to know. I think that's part of it. People getting that deeper understanding of what they are actually dealing with, because we have almost romanticized the idea of public school, and people don't understand that this is not, it was never meant to educate your child. That was never the purpose of this system. So, the more people understand these, where it comes from, what it's about, what it really is, I think that's going to really help people continue to wake up. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing what you have shared with our audience. Hopefully we will get even more people to public school exit, mass exodus, whatever you want to call it. Get your kids out, save your kids. Thank you so much for coming on, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me, Quisha. Well, I want to thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your program. I'm looking forward to having you on my show as well. You're doing so much great work. It's a tremendous honor to be on here. So if people want to find me, you can find me a lot of different places. My personal website is libertysentinel with an sentinel.org. That's where I just post, a mix of personal stuff, blog posts, and things that people send me that I think are useful. I'm senior editor at The New American. You can go to thenewamerican.com. It's a print magazine. People can find Public School Exit at publicschoolexit.com. All kinds of resources for moms and dads and pastors that are thinking about what they need to do at this point. We want to make it as easy as possible. And then you can find my writing all over the place. Any search engine except Google will usually lead you in the right direction. So thank you so much, Quisha.
Thank you. I will make sure to list all of your ways to connect with you in the description box below. Don't forget to like, comment, share this video, because parents need to know this. So share this video and subscribe. And don't forget to give us a 5-star like wherever you get your podcasts. And I think the dogs barking is the signal that it's time to go. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.